Boa noite a todos presentes aqui em Miami, também aqui que acompanham a transmissão.
Good evening, all those who are present here in Miami and also those who accompany us live. There are hundreds of people accompanying us through Irdin Editors YouTube channel. We are here in Miami and the theme of this lecture is Paths to Transformation. What we call transformation in this context is the process triggered when we reveal our consciousnesses and detect the need of very authentic needs for change. And these transformation are indispensable, and the way we go through these transformations and how we enjoy this process is how we are going to see this today. My name is Friar Luciano. I am the speaker, a writer, and also general manager of Fraternidade International Humanitarian Federation. This is the 17th lecture of a cycle of lectures in different countries. We have other lectures in the United States. We will have in Tulsa, January 10th, the theme the ceremonial of life, and then Tahlequah, fears and liberation of consciousness, and then the 23rd, world situation and unknown states of consciousness, and then the 29th, in Mount Shasta, also common good, the value of evolutive group life, closing of the meeting of a group of the Light Network. You are all invited to participate. They are open lectures. Well, first of all, let us recognize that transformation is a gradual process, and it naturally has an impact on our consciousness, our minds, our emotion, our way of thinking, of interacting with the world, and again, it's an unavoidable process. And we can only not precisely accelerate more, but give more quality to this transformation when we aspire to expand our consciousness and our expression, having something broader than that which we are today as a reference. So every human being unavoidably goes through this process. Then when it goes over a certain degree, as we will see, it's not only an aspiration but an ambition. We see some obstacles that make it difficult for a process of life, of transformation, flowing, harmonious process of transformation. And when it enters our experience, that which we call resistance, suffering, pain, and it's also a process of transformation. So we can begin reflecting, each one of us, with a question. What human being? How do I see myself as a human being today, and what human being do I aspire for being? What human being do I want to give to myself, to my family, for my surroundings, for the world? Which planet do I aspire to leave for the coming generations? And everything begins with the simple question that eventually a great number of us do not ask themselves so consciously or so regularly, to have them as a thermometer and make a conscious exam. And when we do this exercise, we gradually realize, and we develop a sensibility to see what we are supposed to transform, so that we may improve our relationships, everything that we believe that we are. But another question connected to this is, what are our priorities? Have we ever wondered? We have ever wondered, we established a goal and we conquer it, and we go automatically, and we don't renew this surge try to discover what we are doing here.
E quando tocamos o nível
And
da
when we
nossa consciência
touch
um
the
pouco mais,
level of our consciousness a little more deeply, we discover that a potential emerges, and eventually our consciousness themselves begin to open a potential that we didn't know we had on all levels, on all rings with which we interact with ourselves, with our families, with social life, all the scopes which we relate to. Well, something all of us go through that we don't have this knowledge of is our transformation is very drawn in cycles that happens every 7 years. So every 7 years we have a group of experiences that help us to mature aspects that are typical of that phase, that gradually advance every 7 years and promote these transformations. And someone could think and reflect how their 7 years were and how they experienced, especially when we are a little bit more aware from when we are 14 years old, how these 7 years, in every 7 years something important has happened as an impulse, a crisis. I don't like to use this word, a moment of transition, of expansion, something that every 7 years brings us a more determining impulse, and we eventually discover there many things. This we could even lead us to not only come to know ourselves better and more profoundly, but also prepare ourselves for the coming 7 years when when another 7 years are renewed. Why? Because at every 7 years we go through a process of learning experience, of assimilation, and when the moment approaches to enter other 7 years, we receive other stimuli that generally go together with that which we are living, points out to that which we are going to find and live, and eventually prepares us to experience this. So we have something in our cycle of human life that are every 7 years that could help us very much to expand our self-knowledge and prepare ourselves better for that which we are supposed to live and experience. Again, transformation is always a gradual process, organic, very spontaneous, but depending on the goals or our aspiration, eventually this process could be triggered more consciously, and why not more intensively also, and more regularly. And this is so, as we were saying, because we always need to assimilate after a process of learning experience, to assimilate, to do a synthesis in our consciousness of that which we are experiencing and prepare ourselves for the following stage. Generally, the human consciousness does not give any attention to this because we are much influenced by the collective consciousness and we adhere to patterns that we receive from outside of us until someday, for some reason, life itself, our intelligence, that life is, places us in some situation that makes us think, is this so? What I'm living, is it really what I'm supposed to live, or am I on a way of a collective experience without realizing? And then life, for some reason, stops us or puts us in a point of reflection. In some cases, depending on the degree of decision of the individual, there is also an abrupt change, but this is relatively delicate because few human beings could manage to go through this without going through some traumas. We also have some traumas that make it difficult for us to transform ourselves and even make it difficult for us to realize transformation as, or perceive transformation as a healthy process.
mesmo a aproximação
When we see the approximation of a
uma
stimulus that is
evitamos aquela experiência,
close to the
eventualmente
trauma, we avoid that
uma chave para o
experience,
nosso crescimento.
and eventually it could be a key for our growth.
E aqui então nós temos
And
que ter
here
atenção
we should
para não
place our attention
substituir ou não
so
perder a proporção
as not to
entre
replace or lose the proportion between aspiration and ambition, because aspiration is when we sense, we perceive, we see,
em muitas dimensões com as quais
again, on many dimensions with which we interact, both within us as well as externally. So we perceive the approximation of an experience, an opportunity, and we aspire to live that in the best way possible. And when we lose the proportion and ambition enters that is purely mental and selfish, we come out of our potential and we enter some experiences with which we don't have a solid, consistent foundation to go through that experience. So many individuals, many human beings oftentimes enter through their only ambition unnecessary experiences because they didn't precisely measure where their aspiration ended, their legitimate wish for some experience, and an ambition entered that oftentimes doesn't even belong to us, an ambition that is not even part of our true longing for a true experience. And we have to learn something, and generally this is painful, becomes painful in many planes, on many planes. So ambition has also have to be measured because it's permeated by a lot of prejudice, but to a certain proportion it's an authentic impulse that we have to evolve. But the thing is that out of a certain proportion we eventually lose the possibility to discern the correct point of things. So ambition could be together with little discernment, and from this point our experience could become more or less painful depending on how much we can organize this process. No transformation can be forced, right? Oftentimes, as we will see, we linger to transform some situations within our consciousnesses because everything begins within our consciousnesses, and life or situations pressure us into some transformation that should be a spontaneous process. But as we resist, this process ends up being forced, but a forced transformation, and outside of that precise moment that we should experience it should not happen. This is important for us to understand. Otherwise, the word would not be transformation, but manipulation, seduction, all other words that are not within the context of this reflection. If we decide to follow the challenges that life presents to us each day, we begin to perceive, to realize that we have to be more responsible to our decisions. Generally, the world or society or the collective way of thinking stimulates us, in my understanding, into a certain principle of selfishness that is out of measure, and from that point everything that happens outside of the ring of this understanding of what I need is not part of my consciousness, and therefore I become a relatively irresponsible being with the consequences of what is happening around me. And in this process it's useless to blame someone for that which happens to us or that which happens in the world. If we really want to become a transformative presence in our families, with ourselves, in society, in our work, in our job, whatever, we have to begin by assuming by the responsibility that everything we do interferes directly or indirectly in this family, in this society, in this world that we say that we want to see different or better. So this gradual awareness of responsibility places us in a certain special pressure for us to assume the coherence of this process of transformation. Why? As we can observe in the world generally, there are many narratives, a lot of discussion, many approaches, many ideologies that die centimeters or millimeters after the people speak, because they don't have the consistency of testimonial of the experience that we are speaking of. So this process of transformation has to be accompanied very responsibly, in a responsible way, for us to become aware of the strength of the example and the strength of our speech. Each one of us that lives, coexists in group environments, social environments, see how we reach that point of reflection when we really see ourselves preaching or saying things, speaking about situations, promoting codes of behavior that deeply we know that we don't fully experience that. So here we bring this reflection about the responsibility of when we interact and promote impulses of transformation, whatever level it may be. We should assume the example or the reference of that which we are saying, not to be is saying something that we are exempt of being that which we say. And from there, unavoidably, we will experience many processes of frustration within ourselves and outside of ourselves. We will now see some eventual obstacles or difficulties on this path of transformation. Again, it's a reflection inside of a context that we understand of people who open themselves to expand their own consciousnesses and have realized that without a gradual transformation, without a gradual adaptation to this world that is so complex and contradictory, it will be very difficult for each one to keep their own inner values and not fall into a incoherence of knowing that which is correct within themselves and have an action outside, and eventually even contrary to that, and some moment of their lives they will experience some sort of suffering. Well, we can only go through conscious transformations in our character, in our way of feeling, of thinking, in our way of acting, when we realize that something within us is not well, or that something in our relationships is not working well. So it's a thermometer that all of us have, that our own consciousness have, that begins to indicate to us, to point out to us that which we should observe for a process of transformation. Many of us oftentimes do not know, we don't know what we are supposed to do, what we are supposed to be, but we have identified and we know that we are not what we are not supposed to be or do, which are different situations. Eventually, I may not know what I'm supposed to do later on, but I am sure about that which I'm not supposed to do. Just by that, knowing that, we would organize our lives very much enough, or even knowing eventually what we are not supposed to think, feel, or even do. But we insist because eventually our consciousnesses are not so skilled or are not so much trained to do this exam and be coherent. So this is a reflection for us who are trying to mature our human expression and have a quality of life that is more coherent with that which we understand to be the correct thing to do. So even if eventually we don't know what we are supposed to transform ourselves or what we are supposed to transform in ourselves, if we don't do that which is not we are not no longer supposed to do, it makes it easier for us to make some decisions and not insist into paths and situations that do not correspond to our consciousness. So let us reflect about some situations so that eventually we can identify something that is useful for each one of us and leave some here with something useful for this process if it is the case. So generally, the human consciousness has a tendency to become crystallized in attachments, to be tied to many states for different reasons, for a feeling of insecurity, of protection, or to preserve an image. So again, what human being do we want to be? Do we want to be an image, an appearance to the world, or do we really want to discover our potential and place this potential at service of my individual development or even of our families, our groups, and all those rings with which we relate to? So resistance to these changes and adjustments could represent an obstacle or even attract at a certain point a stronger impulse to break this resistance, which unavoidably I would go through a transformation through some type of suffering. An aspect that is present in human mind is that which we call pride. So our pride impedes or makes it difficult for us to recognize necessary signs to some transformation. So at home or in our work environment or social environment, something shows us or even enhances to us some situation that we are supposed to change, but out of pride we don't recognize that. And you see, it's something a little childish because it's a process that begins within our own consciousness. So if we become aware of something, eventually it will promote or would promote some state of shame, let us say, before others. Why not to live this within our own consciousness, but not wanting to see this within our own consciousness, which is what we call pride? For sure, it will lead us someday, to a situation of frustration that we will see ourselves before an experience that doesn't flow well, an experience of transformation that doesn't flow well, because we don't want to recognize the signs for us to transform ourselves. In Oklahoma, we will study precisely the 12 fears that exist in our subconscious that paralyze our consciousnesses before the processes we live on the day by day. So all of us have this process, have contact with this process in our unconscious. And as that generates some kind of paralyzation. And we see ourselves blocked, paralyzed to live that process in a flowing way. So you see the connection with the subject of fears. Those who want can follow the sharing in Oklahoma when we speak about this. A word that we should be very careful also with that is natural to our human nature is that which we call competitiveness, because a sick competitivity could force us through ambition to be something or want to be something that we will not be able to be, that unavoidably will cause us to linger in some states that do not correspond to us. And in an analogy, it's like being surfing with the GPS in a city that we don't know. And then ambition leads us to this process, this unknown process that we were not supposed to live, and unfortunately or unavoidably we could go through a sick experience. And mentioning competitiveness, it could push us into an artificial experience that is not part of our aspiration and path. And from this point, again, we could be led to experience situations that later on we would have to use a lot of energy and time to transform ourselves. So, sick competitiveness and out of proportion could be an obstacle for our transformation as human beings. And as we were saying, we also have a tendency to be crystallized and attached. And attachment is what? It's attachment to what? To states of consciousness, to people, situations that no longer correspond to our consciousness. And depending on the moment of life that we are going through, our intelligence, our inner economy prevents us to go to some environments, and eventually we go through some experiences that are not nice experiences, situations. And this movie, this layer that we call pride, it's actually a thick layer, allows us to feel this and make a decision before this. So we prefer to insist in attachment situations, to crystallize relationships, rather than in this same relationship generate reaction that would be good to all. New air. It's like walking in an air that is dead. Instead of opening the windows and allow fresh air to enter and renew the relationships that will only allow relationships to improve. But this attachment, this crystallization at a certain point could cause some sort of incomprehension. Something very present today in our lives, as we know, are the influences of collective consciousness. So as I was saying, oftentimes individually we perceive something that we are supposed to transform. However, our susceptibility to collective consciousness is so great that we don't allow ourselves the space and moment to allow this transformation to take place. So it's important that each one, if we want to deepen into this individual process of transformation, for us to observe how collective consciousness influences our way of feeling, of interacting, or even our goals, our objectives of today as human beings and beings of good in social and professional lives are authentic, were born within ourselves, or did we get a lift in some collective ambition and then 7 years later, 14 years, 21, 49, 56. Is my life this? Have I really come to do this here? So it's important to observe how authentic we are in that which we are experiencing and how influenced we are by the collective. which eventually changes as the wind changes.
Alguns vídeos da década de
If we
80,
get
por
some
exemplo, de
videos
jogos de
of the
futebol, os jogadores são
80s of
jogadores grandes, então
football,
é
soccer
outro tipo de apresentação. Hoje
game,
todo mundo raspa a cabeça, tem outro
people
tipo.
were different. Today
Por quê? Será
they
que é uma moda? Será
have
que é uma necessidade?
different
De
appearance,
onde
they
vem
shave their
um exemplo
hairs.
bem comum,
What
muitas
is
vezes a
this? Is
sociedade
this
está
a
pressando na consciência
fashion?
coletiva sem perceber,
Or
e nós aderimos àquilo,
we,
nos
we
meios
oftentimes
vamos
enter
estudar,
into
na mídia tudo
collective
famoso,
conscious and we
é o
don't
medo
even
de não sermos
realize. So
aceitos pela
one of the
sociedade.
fears we will study in
Uma
Oklahoma is the fear
apresentação,
of
eu
not
sou
being
mais
accepted in
enriquecer,
society. So we have
então
a
são aquilo que estamos
presentation
estimulando
or a
ninguém
way
a
of
ser
being.
hostil ou com menos educação.
We are not stimulating
Mas,
anyone
por
to
que
be
não sermos
hostile
autênticos,
or
não?
less
Sendo
polite, but
quem
why
nós
not
somos,
being
buscando
authentic, being
interação
the one
saudável
who we are,
e
and looking
construtiva com
for
o
a
outro,
healthy and
mas
constructive
definitivamente
relationship,
como ser
but
humano,
definitively
temos que ser
as human
autênticos,
beings,
porque
we have
senão
to be
vamos
authentic.
ingressar na experiência
Otherwise,
coletiva
we will
e
enter
cada vez
collective
mais ver
experience and unavoidably
justamente a
we
frustração
will also experience
daquela que se diz
frustration, the
mais gente.
frustration of not being ourselves.
Bem,
Well,
outro ponto que
another
dificulta muito as
point that it makes it very difficult for us to transform ourselves
de escutar,
is
dialogar
our
e
difficulty
conseguir ver
in listening, in
situações de
dialoguing,
outras
in seeing
perspectivas do que
situations
aquela que naturalmente
from
vemos.
perspectives that
Isso não é
are
uma
different to the ones that we
limitação que
usually see
precisaríamos
things.
refletir sobre ela,
So
porque
this is
muitas
something,
vezes
a limitation that
os
we should
famosos daily
reflect
domésticos
upon,
deixam a
because
mente desligada.
oftentimes,
Não?
even in our daily
Adoro
lives,
isso.
the family lives,
Profissional
the
e aos
professional
mais
lives,
amplos.
and
Muitos
other
conflitos,
wider
incluindo
environments,
guerras na época que
many
acontecem
conflicts and even
simplesmente pela
important wars
dificuldade que os indivíduos têm
happen
para escutar,
because individuals have
colocar suas
difficulty
ideias nas
in
situações
sitting down,
respectivas e
listening
tentar
to
chegar
each
num
other,
ponto.
and putting their
Então,
ideas,
mesmo com o tema da competitividade,
bringing their
não, isso
ideas,
pode
and
levar a algum
reaching a
extremo
common
do
point.
não
So you see how
diálogo, mas não abertura
competitiveness
para escutar, para
could lead
perceber
us
outra
to a
perspectiva
difficulty
e
in
até também
listening,
ver uma
or
transformação.
going or perceiving,
E
realizing
nós, em
some
geral,
different perspective.
sempre temos não um
So we
instinto, é uma
generally
situação no
have
nosso ego
a
de
situation
uma
in our egos
autodefesa
of
diante do que nos
self-defense
é apontado como
in the
uma
face of that
limitação,
which
mas
is
enfim.
pointed out
Então,
to us
alguém
as
que
a
convivemos
limitation.
no
So
lar, por
someone
exemplo,
who we live with at
ou
home, for example,
na vida
or in our
social ou
social
grupal,
or group
quer nos
life,
mostrar muitas
wants to
vezes
show us,
veja uma outra
look,
perspectiva.
look at
Você
this
está
other
vendo desde um ângulo,
perspective.
eu vejo um outro ângulo.
You are seeing from
Vamos
an
tentar
angle and I'm
ver
seeing from a different angle.
como isso coincide,
Let's
alguma
see
coisa pode
how this
conciliar.
coincides
Esse
and how we
orgulho, ou essa
can
dificuldade de
conciliate.
escutar,
But this
impede
pride or
esse espaço, não?
difficulty in listening
Dialogarmos,
impedes
vermos
this
com outra
space for us to
perspectiva,
dialogue
e aí perdemos
and
uma
seeing
grande
things from different
oportunidade de
perspective,
aprender
and then
e
we
de nos transformar.
lose a great opportunity to learn and transform ourselves.
Nessa linha de reflexão
And this
também,
line of
a
reflection
dificuldade que
also,
nós temos
the
de
difficulty
reconhecer
that we
nossos
have in
próprios limites.
recognizing our own
Porque
limits,
uma coisa nós temos uma aspiração
because one thing
de
is
dar
to have
mais
an
e
aspiration to
ampliar o nosso
give more,
potencial.
to
Isso é
expand our
muito
potential.
autêntico
This is
e
very
deve ser
authentic
desenvolvido.
and really should be
Outra coisa, não
developed.
reconhecer
But
meu
something
limite.
else is not
Outra, não
recognizing my
reconhecer o que
limit
eu tenho que me
and therefore
transformar,
not
avançar
recognizing that
sobre o
which I'm
terreno
supposed to transform myself,
não seguro,
advance
no
on the
aspecto precário da minha própria
unsafe
consciência,
land of some
inevitavelmente vou pisar em
precarious
falso.
aspect of my
Não,
consciousness.
uma referência, vou pisar em falso
So
e
I
vou
will
experimentar uma situação que poderia ser evitada
experience a
se
situation that
tivesse
could
aquilo que está
be
na base de
prevented
toda
if
essa
I had
reflexão,
something
nós
that
temos uma humildade
on the
saudável,
foundation of
não
this whole
limitada,
reflection
de
is that a
perceber
healthy
se aquilo tem um
humility
limite, algum tipo de
of
limite,
perceiving
por que
if
não
this has a
ampliar esse
limit,
limite?
and why not
Tem um livro
expanding
tão
this limit.
intitulado
There
O
is a
Poder
book
dos
called
Limites.
The Power of
Como
Limits,
o limite pode representar
how
para
a
nós
limit could
uma alavanca
represent
e não um limite
for us
na
something that will
concepção de
impel
realização.
us to go up, to move.
E aqui tem a questão dos traumas.
And here there is the matter of traumas, as I was saying
É um tema
previously.
que também vamos tratar
It's a thing that we
quando
always
refletimos sobre os
also
medos,
speak
sobre
about when we reflect about the 12
todos
years,
nós, inevitavelmente,
because
ao longo
all
da
of
nossa
us,
vida,
unavoidably throughout our lives,
experimentamos
experience
ou
or go through traumas
surgem em nós cicatrizes,
which
memórias,
generate
registros
marks,
quando eventualmente estamos
memories,
diante de um
records
processo de
within us, and
transformação,
eventually when we
se o
are in a
gatilho
process
ele
of
encadeia um sinal, ele se aproxima de nós,
transformation,
mesmo
if
inconscientemente. Eu
the
vou dar um
button that
exemplo
will
que eu
trigger
dou
the
com certa
trauma,
frequência, porque creio que muitos de nós já o
I will give you
experimentamos.
an example that I believe
Nós
that
estamos
many of
andando
us have experienced.
e aí sentimos um aroma,
When we are
vamos
walking and we
sobrevivemos
feel
uma
the
árvore,
aroma, the
vamos
smell
sobre uma árvore
the,
e aquilo nos remete
of
imediatamente na
a tree,
velocidade,
and it
na consciência,
brings us back
para uma situação
to a
que
situation
experimentamos
of
quando
us
éramos
that we
crianças ou
experienced when we
adolescentes
were
numa rua.
children or teenagers or
Aroma
even
que ativa em
adults,
nós
a
uma
smell that
experiência
will
que
activate an
eventualmente aquela
experience in
experiência,
us.
claro que ela
And
também
eventually this
existe uma
experience
recordação positiva,
also has
porém
a
no contexto do
positive
trauma, eventualmente aquele aroma
re-
ativa em nós
memory,
a
but in this
recordação daquele trauma,
context of
daquele
trauma will
sofrimento, e aí
remind us
já
of
temos
this
ali
trauma, this
uma
suffering,
primeira
and then we
barreira
have a
de não
first barrier
experimentar de novo aquela
for
situação.
not experiencing that situation
Uma
again.
música também, não?
Or also a song.
Ouvimos uma música
We listen
e
to a
nos
song
traz imediatamente
and
uma
it brings us
recordação, a memória de
back
um
to a
registro
memory, again, the memory
antigo,
of a record
não?
that will
Algo
activate
que nos traz
something
uma
that will
certa
bring
resistência ao
us a
processo da
certain
transformação.
resistance to the process of transformation. Well,
Em geral,
generally,
nós seres humanos temos
we
uma
human beings
tendência à
have a
ingratidão
tendency,
muito grande,
a great tendency to
ainda que seja uma
ingratitude.
palavra forte, não?
Although it's a strong
Dificilmente nós
word and
conscientemente
we
assumiríamos que
will
somos
not
ingratos.
consciously
Vamos dar aqui um exemplo.
assume that we
Quem
are
de nós
ungrateful. I
hoje
will give you an example.
extrapolou até
Who
agora, não, 19,
of us,
18h36,
since we woke up
agradeceu pela vida
until
que
this moment, 6:36
hoje quem de nós
p.m., has
real,
given thanks
sinceramente,
for the life we
tem um
have?
sentimento de
Has
gratidão pela
who
vida
has had a feeling of
que a vida lhe
gratitude
ofereceu até hoje,
for what
pela vida
life
que tem
has
hoje.
offered us so
Não
far and the
falando
life
da
we have
abundância
today?
ou
We are not
resistência,
speaking of
nós
abundance
falando da
or
experiência de
restriction.
vida,
I'm
do
speaking of the
aprendizado que temos
experience of
hoje,
life, the learning
daqueles que estão
experience we have
conosco,
today, of those
aqui
who
agora,
are with
simultaneamente
us.
por estarmos aqui.
Are we
Se
now,
nossa vida fosse
right
terminada
now,
em 3
thankful for
minutos,
being here? If our lives were
aí
going to
deixaríamos agradecidos
were
ou com algum tipo
s-
de
end
sensação
in
de
3 minutes, would be
pendência ou
grateful, or
ingratidão.
we would have some
Pode
sensation
parecer
of
um
something that
exemplo
is
ou um
missing or
exemplo
ingratitude?
infantil,
It could be a
podemos
childish
aproximar.
sound like a
Porém,
childish
a gratidão
reference,
vai muito
but
além de nós sermos
gratitude
gratos por
goes
algo
much
material.
beyond
Estamos falando da gratidão
being
no
grateful
sentido
for something
muito mais
material.
amplo,
We are speaking
não
about
que vinculado
gratitude
com algo material.
with about
E quando nós somos
gratitude to
gratos,
something that is much
todo o
wider.
potencial
When
que
we are
nós temos
grateful, the whole
diante de
potential
nós
that we have
emerge.
before us
Então,
emerges.
essa tendência sempre de
So
reclamar,
if our
sempre
tendency is to
acusar,
always
sempre estar
complain, accuse,
insatisfeito,
or
sempre
being
estar ali apontando o que está errado,
pointing out that which is
inclusive no
not
outro, não
that's
dificilmente
wrong
fazemos
in
assim com o
others,
dedinho
we do
sempre
like
para lá.
that with
Uma
our
questão que
fingers,
fisioterapeutas podem resolver algum dia, não
something that
vocês.
physiotherapists could resolve in
Dedinho
our
vai para lá, tem que fazer
consciousness.
assim de vez em quando para
Our
podermos
finger
então
goes there and it
examinar a
should do it like
consciência,
this
podermos
sometimes for us to
crescer
examine
como ser
our
humano.
consciousnesses and grow
Só tem
up as human
benefícios,
beings.
só nos faz
It
bem.
only has
Então,
benefits, it
voltando à
only
gratidão, ela nos
does
traz a
good for
possibilidade
us.
de
So
termos um
ingratitude
potencial e um
brings
melhor
us the
em tudo, em todo
so
e a cada
gratitude
momento.
brings us the possibility of
Pense sobre
being the
isso.
potential in
Tenta
everything in
começar,
each
não no
moment.
dia de amanhã,
Think about
a
this
noite de hoje
and try to
agradecendo.
begin not tomorrow
E amanhã
but
se pergunte, minha
tonight,
noite foi diferente porque eu
giving
agradeci
thanks.
antes de dormir?
Was my night different because
Essa
I gave
oportunidade é
thanks before
vida, somos
sleeping? So
gratos
see
pela
how
vida.
how
Não
we
viver
are
essa
relieved
lamúria
for being
contínua, não, que as pessoas vivem.
grateful
Não
to
viver uma
life
lamúria contínua.
and not
Não
living
nos faz
this
a vitimização.
continuous
O
complaints
único que
and
faz
state
é
of being
cancelar o nosso
victims that
potencial.
only cancels our
Eu me coloco
potential.
como vítima,
So I place myself as a victim.
desenvolvo o processo de
I
gratidão
develop
e
a
todo o
process
potencial que eu
of
tenho para ser um agente de
ingratitude,
mudança,
and the whole
ele ali
potential I
mesmo
have to be
fica
as
bloqueado.
an agent of
Acompanha comigo?
change is blocked. Can you follow this? So we are supposed to reflect about
E a
this.
humildade, como
And
dissemos,
humility, as we were
como
saying,
esse estado
as
íntimo e
this
receptivo para
internal and
perceber a
receptive
cada
state
momento o que podemos
for us to
fazer melhor.
perceive at each
Veja,
moment
nossa vida
what we can do
seria outra se a
better.
cada momento
Our lives would be
tivéssemos
different
essa
if at each
atenção,
moment we
essa
had this
vigilância
attention,
em
this
perspectiva
vigilance in
de sempre querer
perspective
fazer melhor
of
melhor
always
que nós
wanting to
fazíamos no dia
do
anterior,
better
ou no
that
momento
which
anterior.
we did
É uma maneira de me
on the
dirigir aos
previous
outros,
day.
uma
It's a
maneira de
way
me
of
dirigir às
addressing
situações.
others or
Essa é a
situations.
diversidade.
Do we
Ou
have
não
this?
poderíamos ter
Or
essa
could we have
humildade,
this
não,
humility,
essa
this
receptividade de perceber
receptivity
o que eu posso
for
melhorar, o
receiving
que eu posso
or realizing
aperfeiçoar
that which I
para ter
can
benefício
improve on or
individual,
perfect? It
familiar,
only
global,
has
social, qualquer benefício.
individual, family,
Por que
group,
será que o ser humano
social
resiste
benefits.
tanto à
And why is
transformação?
that human beings resist
Não
transformation so
será
much?
por essa
Isn't it
tendência
for
coletiva
this collective
de nos
tendency of
cristalizar
wanting to
em momentos
crystallize
de nossa
ourselves
expressão
in
e
moments
aí
of expression
moldar a nossa
and
consciência
then
para
mold our
algo que eventualmente
consciousnesses
não nos corresponde?
into something that
Vamos
eventually
pensar
do
sobre
not
isso.
correspond to us? We have to think about
Para
this.
concluir,
To conclude,
temos aqui 6
we
reflexões
have here
de
6
caminhos para a
reflections
transformação
on
para
paths
ajudar-nos a guiar
to
um pouco mais o que
transformation
já
to help
conversamos até
us
aqui e
to
fazer uma
expand
síntese
a little
também
bit
dessa palestra.
more what we have
Antes de passarmos para
reflected
a
about
recorrência e
so far,
perguntas.
and then make a
Então, veja,
synthesis of this lecture before we
o
go
primeiro
on to
caminho para a
the
transformação é o que
questions.
nós chamamos o caminho da
The
observação
first
de
path
si
to
e observação
transformation
do
is the
outro.
path of observation of oneself and
Não uma
others,
observação
not an
obcecada
observation that is
buscando problemas
obsessed or
ou buscando
looking
o que está
for
errado nos demais,
problems
mas
and
sim
or that which
como
is
um
wrong
ser
in
humano.
others or in
Mas uma
yourself,
observação
as we were saying,
saudável
but a
e
healthy
evolutiva,
observation and
até
an
porque se
evolutive
eu me
observation. Even
adestro
why,
nesse processo de
if I train
observação,
myself in this process of
cada um de nós,
observation,
tá? Não importa quanto dure esse encontro, ele
regardless
tem
of
essa intenção
how
sempre de
long this
puxar o
meeting
outro para o seu melhor.
takes, I always have
Mas sermos
the
proatentos
intention of
para
bringing the
observar
best
e
from
não
others, but I'm not attentive to
desmerecer
observe
ao outro,
myself.
é não
If I'm
conseguir
not attentive
perceber
to observe
quem deu
myself and others,
espaço para a
I
melhor
cannot
expressão do outro.
perceive or
Seja
give
no outro
space for the
jovem da
best
família ou não, ou um
expression of
amigo da
others.
família ou não, ou um conhecido
If
ou
they,
não. E estamos sobre esse estado de
my
atenção e
acquaintances
observação
or
para
family or
tirar do outro o
whatever,
seu melhor
I
e dar
should
também o meu melhor para o
be in the
outro.
state of
O tal terrível
observation of
livro
taking the
sagrado
best
oriente.
from others. The
Quando
Tao Te
dois
Ching,
sábios se encontram,
the
a
sacred book of
presença
the
da
East,
virtude
says when two or
refresca
more
a
meet,
alma. Então, se
the
eu ofereço
presence
não
of
somente o meu melhor,
openness
estou observando o melhor do outro
offer.
também,
If I
essa
am
é como
observing,
nossa
giving my
transformação
best and
seria
observing the
diferente.
best of others, do you see
Começa
how
no dia a dia
our
com quem nós
process
já
of
convivemos de
transformation would be
novo.
very different?
Se achamos
If we
ou
think or
reconhecemos que
recognize
nosso dia a dia está muito
that our day by
tendendo à
day
cristalização,
tends too much to
fazemos como Maria interessante,
crystallization,
não? Abrimos a
we should
janela,
do like
deixamos
that
entrar o ar
example. We
fresco, a luz do
open the
sol
window,
e vamos
let
passar
fresh air
eventualmente
and
a caminhar,
sun enter,
observando-nos mais
and
e
we
ao outro
will
também. Um
move
segundo
on
caminho para
observing
esse caminho da
ourselves more and also
experiência e da
others.
síntese.
Another path is the path of
Em geral,
experience and
nós
synthesis.
experimentamos inúmeras
Generally, we enter
experiências,
many
porém não
experiences,
fazemos síntese.
however, we don't do the
E por não
synthesis.
fazermos
And
síntese,
for not doing
vira e mexe,
synthesis,
como se diz no Brasil,
once,
vamos ser
time and
levados a
again, as
repetir
they
a
say in Brazil,
experiência para poder
vira e
aprender,
mexe,
para poder
we
assimilar.
don't
É por isso que é muito importante no nosso dia a dia
have the
nós criarmos esse
possibility
mecanismo de nos perguntar
to
o
change.
que eu
So
tenho que
this is why
aprender
it's
com isso,
important to
o que eu aprendi
ask
com isso,
ourselves, what have
o
I
que eu
learned
aprendi
with
com
this?
aquela
What have
pessoa
I
que eu
learned
conheci
with
ontem,
that person
o
I
que eu aprendi
met
com aquela
today?
situação que eu observei
What have I
eventualmente fora
learned
de
with
mim,
that situation I
mas que estimula
observed
meu esforço para eu
eventually
aprender
outside of
algo.
me, but that
Então esse caminho da
stimulates
experiência e da síntese é muito
myself for me
importante,
to learn
especialmente a
something?
síntese,
So
para que nossa
synthesis is very
reflexão seja mais
important,
contínua
especially
e
for
ao
our
nosso
learning experience
altura.
to be more
Estejamos evoluindo,
continuous, and
crescendo,
for us to a certain
desenvolvendo
point see
um pouco
ourselves
mais
evolving
numa alegria interna
in
que
an
não se
inner
compra
joy
e é
that is not
incomparável.
bought and cannot be compared.
Esse é um caminho que
There is a path
inadvertidamente,
that
infelizmente, a grande maioria,
unfortunately most of
opta,
us
mesmo inconscientemente, que é
chooses,
o caminho do sofrimento e da
even
desilusão.
unconsciously,
Nós
which
somos
is the path of
empurrados
suffering
ou
and
levados por esse
delusionment,
caminho
that we are
pelos
pushed
motivos
and
das
or
situações que
led
estudamos
to
antes, as
due to the
resistências,
reasons and situations we have
desapego,
studied before:
orgulho,
resistance,
crítica.
attachment,
Tudo isso
pride,
cria um
criticism.
processo de
All of this
sofrimento
creates
que
a
vai nos
process of
empurrar para uma
suffering that will
transformação,
push
porém,
us into a
ainda que
process
seja
of
um caminho,
transformation.
não
But
seria,
even
não,
if it's a
em princípio,
path, it wouldn't be
o mais harmonioso
initially
e em sã
the
consciência
most
aquele
harmonious
escolhido por nenhum de nós.
or the one
E
that
a
we would
desilusão, porque muitas
choose
vezes criamos uma
being
falsa
conscious.
expectativa
consciously choose.
Perdão, missão,
The other
ou
one
pela
is
perda de
the one of
informação.
making decisions,
Então, nos iludimos para aprender algo com isso.
delusionment.
A termos mais discernimento.
So we go through this to have more discernment, or to deepen more into discernment before we make some decisions.
Da escuta e da assimilação.
The path of listening and assimilation, as we saw before, we learn how to listen, and especially to identify the most positive that exists in others. Otherwise, honestly, life will be unbearable. Anything is a problem, anything is a reason for us to complain, and oftentimes we don't even enjoy someone who is with us. We have a companion, friends, companions on the path, on professional life, whatever it may be. We get used to that, and we no longer perceive others' potentials and something that we didn't even know in others. So this path of listening assimilation is very important. And here's something important in transformation. In transformation is the path of making decision. And why is this path is important? Why is this path important? Think something inside of us that we know that is supposed to be transformed, and we have had the opportunity to transform, but we haven't made the decision to enter this path of transformation. So one of the paths of transformation is for us to learn how to perceive the moment when we mature certain reflection, and we have to make a decision of either being in this indecision, which is the opposite of this. We postpone this transformation, and at a certain point we could be thrown. It's not an adequate expression, but we are pushed into some more painful experience to go through a transformation that for our own individual process the moment has come. We can no longer wait. So a loss could come, a suffering could come from a external stimuli in which we would take too long to make a decision. And the last path to end is the one we call the path of consciousness revision, which generally the previous ones were stimulated in family environments, regardless of any information of any sector of society, a process of revision. Why? Because within our consciousness lies the best thermometer, the best indicator of that which we are supposed to live and also transform. If we are not used to revise our consciousness, unavoidably we enter a automatic process of making decisions that will have consequences in our group lives, our professional lives, our individual lives. So revision of consciousness would allow a path of transformation that would be more continuous, constructive, and process that also complements the processes of those whom we are also experiencing the process of life. So the process of revision is something that would be very good for us today, every day. Even when we are working, traveling, it doesn't matter. When we are, any moment, when we are meditating, doing physical exercise, it's a work in the consciousness. We revise our consciousness, which is where we keep that impulse to help us to evolve, to mature as human beings, to avoid this situation that is so common nowadays, I could say, of meeting people who are 70 years old or even older or a little less, who are young people, who are immature consciousnesses, who have not learned or assimilated all their learning experience, and in a more mature age they see themselves with childish aspects, for not assimilating
processo de transformação.
the whole process of transformation.
Bem,
Well,
essa é a duração em que nós aparecem, 50 minutos.
this is how
Agora
long
temos um tempo
the
disponível
sharing
para
lasts, and now we have some time for you to ask some questions, for those beginning with those who are present here, and if we don't have any question here, we have the chat on YouTube, and we have some minutes that we can dedicate to the questions. So I am open to any question we may have. We have a microphone. You please use the microphone for those who are on the transmission to also accompany the question, please. At the beginning is like this, really, to break the ice. Good evening. I would like to know how we can realize if it's illusion of our mind, of our consciousness change, or if it's something profound that we are living. Because as you said, many barriers perhaps have to be, decisions, important decisions, either yes or no, things that are very difficult for us to go through in ourselves. So I would like to know when this is real, and when this is perhaps just something that perhaps it's not the moment. Thank you for your question. See, generally, we mix our consciousness with our mind, or our consciousness with our emotions. So the answer goes through the discernment between that which is my consciousness, that is much broader, so much broader, that intuition that doesn't come from the mind. It comes from a more profound place of the consciousness. When we perceive something, it happens to everyone, all of us, on all levels of our experience. So one thing is our consciousness, and something else is our mind. So how to know if our mind is analyzing too much, the process of duality, so you are chewing, let us say, as an analogy, a process of decision which is necessary in a rational process. The concrete mind is necessary in everything that is rational. When we are in a process of conscious, which is subjective, in our inner lives and our intimate life, we need a place, a more profound space of our consciousness that eventually could count on concrete mind, on the movement of going through this layer of duality, or the emotional goes through the environment of feelings. But the thermometer is consciousness. And I was saying here, the path of conscious revision. Otherwise, if we are used to be before our own if we are used to be before our consciousness, we can see that our minds are submerged in the collective consciousness. Have you ever found yourselves thinking something that is not yours, or wishing something that's not yours? And we often do this and we don't realize. We do a list to the market, and we go to buy toilet paper, and we all know where this example will end at, and we end up with the trawler full of things, and where the everything come from. We are so superficially in our consciousnesses that we give us the possibility of being prisons of concrete mind and not give attention to the consciousness. So the answer is, give more attention to your consciousness, watch more your concrete mind, even if it's necessary, and all rational processes and duality. It's a necessary process, but the knowledge comes from consciousness, from a deeper level within us. Friar, there is a process of change and transformation that sometimes if it is profound, goes through the breakage of status quo. And this breakage of status quo, could it make the transformative agents, enhancing transformative agents? How can you see this individual process against the collective? Not the one that is outside, but the one that is inside. How does it happen, this talk, this process of making decisions? Good question. Each one of us, when we go through a real and profound process of transformation, we see in the formula of transformation the measure in which we will express that for it to be constructive to others. A true transformation doesn't come to hurt anyone. It goes against the logic of basic social coexistence. Depending on the level of consciousness of those who live the process of transformation, it's very important for it to be accompanied by discernment, and on each measure I make good use of my own transformation to create a beneficial environment of transformation for others. I don't know if it's good for your reflection. I'm going to transform and I don't care for others. I'm going to take a different path and others should find their own way. It's not a mature process that we are reflecting about. So the process is to perceive a course of transformation, and it should not be a breakage process, because each one has a rhythm of transformation. In this intimate environment, we should know that each one has a rhythm of transformation. Each one has a logic that we for sure don't know. So when we touch this nucleus of consciousness and we trigger an authentic process of transformation, this impulse of transformation that is authentic, as it has common good intrinsic, it's going to touch all the environment, even the unconscious. Why? Because everyone senses the movement, even if it's not expressed in an external attitude. Your consciousness changes, and what you emanates from this is emanated, and others can perceive this. There is something very immature in human beings, which is when we transform ourselves, a sort of feeling of prize comes together. So I need to show off my transformation to either conquer others or show off as a prize. This is why I say the value of transformation is within the nature of transformation, this impulse to promote good for others, and we have this mechanism educated within us. Unavoidably, it begins to radiate and promote also changes in attitude, changes of everything in the relationship with others, and therefore we clearly realize how different they are. Today, he didn't say anything, he didn't insist in anything. They only experienced something in an authentic and genuine way, their own transformation. This has a lot of strength. Gandhi used to say, you have to be the transformation you want to see in the world. So it's intrinsic. So a principle of thinking of common good and radiate common good is intrinsic in transformation. For this to be taken to others also. I don't know if it helped you. Friar. In this process of transformation, when we have a lot of information, or deal with a lot of information, or we think that is a lot, we go through processes in which you feel well, in that you feel calm, peaceful. Let us say you go this automatically, you feel well, but at the same time you see yourself also with processes of past events, criticism, difficult situations. This causes a certain disturbance and unbalance, and also aspects of judgment and criticism. When I change all of this, when there is a criticism, not a criticism, but a feedback that you want to give, your intention is not to harm others, but to say, look, you did this in this way, and it wasn't very good as I see it. How to put all of this into this path, because sometimes it's difficult. There is an axis of peace, of quietness and peace, but there are waves that disturb this. The waves are probably situations that you have not made a synthesis of yet. When we leave many points left, things are unfinished, and when they are unfinished, they return to the consciousness to sign and point out, show you what is supposed to be transformed. And on these days with so much superficial periphery and incomplete information, there are many things also in the periphery of our consciousnesses. One possibility would be to try to do a synthesis, and the other would be to learn how to enhance that which is constructive instead of pointing out that which is not good. Because even with the intention of being constructive critics, we would enhance that which is negative, that would cause others to close themselves. So this is a process that I would only have help a little bit more with a concrete example. So there are 2 points. One is to do a synthesis, the path of experience and synthesis. That all of us go through many experiences. The point is, have we had made a synthesis of this? So much we don't, and it is so much so that it disturbs us again. And the other thing is how to develop a critical, constructive process, which is a science, okay? For you to perceive in a moment of whatever dialogue, the moment to leave an impulse to catalyze a constructive change. Those who studied chemistry know that if you put an ingredient in a chemical in the wrong moment, it could have the contrary effect. It's not a point period. Can I ask you another question? So first of all, Friar, I would like to say that I'm very grateful to be here. I had not made any exercise of gratitude, but thank you. I'm very grateful to be here. I was thinking about the final process of revision of consciousness. Do you suggest for us to do a daily exercise until we create a certain discipline, or should it be a more organic process? Good question. First of all, our consciousness had this thus naturally. When our consciousness perceives that we are going through something that is outside of the values necessary for this moment of evolution, let us say, the consciousness will show us. So for us to reacquire this is natural and healthy, it should be regular. It will bring discipline to your emotions. So I know that every day at 5:45 in the morning I'll have certain work. This is individual subject. But at a certain point, when your consciousness realizes that humanly and mentally you can give some attention to this, it will become more regular. This is to say, you are in the transit in an institutional meeting, and your consciousness says, be attentive to how you
depois
speak.
atenção com aquilo, percebe?
Be attentive
Antes
to
era algo
this.
mais
Do you
comprometedor.
see? It begins to be
Agora, a nossa
something that happens at the
consciência,
same
ela não
time.
é como a nossa
But
mente que
our
pensa uma
consciousness
coisa
is
e
not
pensa
like
outra.
our
Ela
minds
tem
that
um
think
sentimento e um
about
pensamento um
something and
pouco mais
something else.
expandido.
No, it's a little
Mas,
bit
de novo,
more
como é algo inato,
expanded.
a própria
But as it's
consciência,
something natural
primeiro é
to the
importante alguma
consciousness,
regularidade.
it's important to
Só
have
que
some
ela não pode
regularity.
exercitar
Just be
o que é
careful
nato
not
como
to
exercício. Tá?
wear
O que é
that which
importante é que
is
com o tempo, cada um
natural
de nós
with the
faça o
exercise. The
exercício
important is that
naturalmente.
we will
Deixe de ser um
do the
exercício para ser
exercise
uma prática.
naturally, for it to
Então, estou
stop
numa
being
reunião
an
de
exercise to be a
negócio,
practice.
interagindo, seja onde for, e a minha consciência está
So
trabalhando
I
e
am in a
observando
business
várias
meeting,
coisas,
whatever, and
me
my
ajudando a
consciousness
ter
is
uma outra
pointing
percepção,
out
me
to something,
permitindo a minha vida, percebe?
helping
Eu
me to
estar
have a
realmente no campo. Estou
perception
lendo
in
documento,
perspective. I'm reading a
avaliando alguns
document,
trabalhos, estou fazendo um negócio, estou
I'm
na
doing
reunião, estou
business,
meditando,
and
não importa.
meditating. It
Minha
doesn't
consciência
matter.
está no background, assim, está no
My
outro plano,
consciousness is in the background,
trabalhando essa
so
revisão,
on
percebe?
another
Sempre
plane,
pedalando a minha
working
consciência.
on this
Opa, eu percebi
revision. Do
uma
you
coisa,
see?
então tento
So I
assimilar.
try to assimilate.
Não, eu ando comigo sempre com um bloquinho assim,
I always
tenho um
walk
bloquinho,
with a
hoje com tecnologia, um
notebook,
jeito mais simples, não? Lembro de uma coisa, anota.
and I remember
Esse é o
something, I take
roteiro
note.
das palestras.
And this is
Aí
how I
eu vejo no
make
avião, ó,
the
fazer a
lectures.
palestra,
I'm on the
pode ser
airplane.
bom,
Oh,
aquele
this
público está
could be
aqui. Então
good for
deixe
this
para
public,
ouvir.
for this context, this thing. It
Intuitivamente, não
comes
um
like
processo
this,
mental que é
as
dinâmico.
an intuitively, not only as a mental process. So to conclude the answer,
Exercício regular.
a regular exercise could be interesting.
Quando você já está mais
And when
atento,
you
aí
perceive
você
that the
dá atenção à sua
consciousness is
própria
more
consciência.
attentive, when you give
Ela
more
vai saber
attention to
acompanhar
your
mais
own
intuitivamente.
consciousness, it will begin to
Sabe, o
accompany
momento
this
para si
more
mesmo, você já está
intuitively.
pronto, preparado, independente do que está fazendo fora.
So, regardless of
Isso
what you are
eventualmente,
doing
sim.
outside,
Agora depende
but
da
eventually,
natureza.
yes,
Tem naturezas
it
um pouco
depends on
mais
our
fluidas,
nature.
um pouco mais informais,
There are some
que
nature
precisam de exercícios
that are
assim,
more
que ajudam
informal,
a equilibrar
formal,
isso
that need this
e entrar mais
practice, this
fundo.
exercise to
E vai
balance
demorar um pouco
this,
mais para o
and
próprio
will take longer
temperamento.
for
E tem
for
outros
the
temperamentos, como tem a
own
voz, tem
temperament
o
of the
ritmo, é um
individual.
pouco mais
But some others
inato,
have
genuíno da sua própria
something
natureza.
more
Então,
genuine,
assim que retomam
natural of their
esse
own nature.
exercício da revisão da consciência,
When they
isso passa a
resume
ser
this
mais regular
exercise
com
of
mais
their
depende do
consciousness,
temperamento.
it becomes regular. Depends on the temperament. You have to find out.
Mais alguma pergunta?
Any other question?
Pronto.
Something that helped me very much is the matter of synthesis, and I would like to have more practical examples. Meditation that I could bring to my day by day. I have noticed that throughout the last 7 years that pass, mainly in the matter of jobs, matters repeat. They evolve, the characters change, I've changed, but the things that repeat, and I have consciously realized that it's time to change. So how can I synthesize? Observing and saying, that's enough. I have learned this lesson, next lesson. Or is it something that comes to me? You say enough. Give yourself the right to ask, what do I have to learn with this? Which generally is not it's a question that we don't ask. So things repeat and repeat. And we don't ask ourselves, what do we have to learn with this? Whatever. But as I also answered Luciano here, inside of this process, we should not have this of forgetting that you are inside of a context. What I have to learn, after learning, I could help others to learn also. Otherwise, we take a little step because we are in society and we don't move on. So we have to think about the common good. What do I have to learn? So when I ask a question and it really makes a synthesis, things disappear before us. Things appear or disappear. They either continue, but you are in a different, you are different. It's not that you are indifferent, but you are in a different learning experience, so you are an agent. It is also, for his question, you are a constructive agent in a silent way. just by asking the question, what do I have to learn for this? Your question is important because oftentimes in a family, social, and professional environments, one of us eventually is the one first on the role that will catalyze for all the others, the one who will open the door. And for this reason, the situation is repetitive because they have to open the door for transformation. And we don't realize about this. And when we ask, what do I have to learn with this? And we learn to do synthesis. Life in the economy of your experience begins to direct things differently. But if we insist in not learning, we are stubborn children. So we have to learn through the path of suffering or disillusionment or tiredness. It's a great instructor, tiredness. One day you say, enough, that's enough. It's the path of tiredness, I'll take note. Seventh path of tiredness, which is inside of the path of suffering, but this is it. So you should ask, what do I have to learn with this, or what have I not learned yet? Because your pride mind could be preventing you to learn. Do you see? There's a recorded lecture of mine recorded on the same channel of Irdin about dreams. So before going to bed, ask yourself, what do I have to learn with this? And when your mind sees, say, calm down, go to bed now, and tomorrow we'll see this. And one day you wake up and you have understood without knowing what you have learned. You have decision made, and we didn't go through the mental chewing. So we have to do a synthesis. It's very difficult to do a synthesis because generally the very modus operandi as leads us to be superficial and jump from one thing to another without synthesis, and we get confused, and our consciousness doesn't have time or space to consolidate the learning experience. And be attentive. Generally, what we need is before us, but as we are ungrateful, we are in a public place and we think it's outside of us. And we go through a worse situation than the first one, and we realize that what we needed was before us, and what the one we needed was before us. And this is just because we are not able to live gratitude. So it's not a final answer. Marilia is asking from the chat, Friar, this process of self-knowledge, could it count on the help of professionals or could be done by the person themselves? Also a very good question. There is always something that we call intermediaries. Doctors, therapists can help in the more technical part of the architecture of the human mind, but they go to the certain point. You have to be careful on how much the intermediary goes over the measure, the limit, and lead our process too much. So we could make the practice, the exercise of conscience exam, and gradually resume this intimacy with our own consciousness. But see, we have to be very careful about who we look for to ask for help. Someone said that a blind could not guide another blind. So we have to have discernment to see who we will ask help from. Again, our best guardian and helper is within us, is our own consciousness. So we do need help as we now collaborating on the reflections. it's still part of what you have mentioned,
Porém,
Marília.
motivo último
But
é
the
que nós
last
podemos
reason
ser
is that we can
completamente
be not
autossuficientes, o que
exactly
determinaria de uma
self-sufficient,
certa soberba
of
e
a certain
egoísmo, não?
pride
E
or
orgulho.
selfishness,
Mas está dentro de nós
but it's
o que
within
nós
us
necessitamos.
what we
Nós
need.
temos que discernindo
So we
se
have to
temos uma
gradually
ajuda alguém
discern
nesse
when we
processo,
receive
em
help
uma
of
medida
someone in
ali
this
até aquele
process,
ponto
which
onde eu me
goes in a measure
reorganizo
to
de
the
acordo com a
point
minha
when
sozinho.
I
Nós não
recognize
vamos
myself and can
para
walk by
viver
myself.
sob nenhum processo de dependência.
So,
Sim,
because we should
mas
not be
para que nossa consciência
dependent,
possa
we are walking
amadurecer,
towards
expandir
the maturing
de
of our
acordo com
consciousnesses
aquele
and
caminho que
expansion of our
permissiona. Aqui no
consciousness
momento íntimo,
according to what
necessidade. E
has
esse acho que
been
tem outro segmento,
foreseen for us. We will
outro tipo
not
de atenção, estamos
include
tratando de princípios.
special
Estamos
needs
tratando de
here
coisas
because
normais
something
de
we are
todos.
dealing with here with in this
Muito bem.
context with
Então,
normal
aqueles que quiserem
situations.
seguir acompanhando essas
So very
matérias
well,
lá no
those who
canal do
want to
YouTube,
continue accompanying this
dia
sharing, these
10
lectures on
estarei então em Tulsa, em
Irdin
Oklahoma.
channel. On the
Fiquem com
10th,
Deus
I will
da vida,
be
que tem muito a ver com o que a
in
gente vai ver aqui hoje,
Tulsa, Oklahoma,
no dia 12.
live
O
ceremonial,
medo e a liberação da consciência em Tariquá.
fears and
Depois,
liberation of
Monte Shasta, dia
consciousness,
21.
and then Mount
A
Shasta
situação
on the
mundial, estados
23rd,
desconhecidos de consciência.
world
Depois, no
situation
dia
and unknown
29,
states of
o bem
consciousness, and
comum,
then the
o
29th,
valor da
common
vida
good, the value
produtiva.
of evolutive
Inclui
group
aqui,
life,
então, família,
which
sociedade, os
includes
amigos,
family,
coisas que são
society,
seis
friends,
anéis,
everything that
onde
are the
vai
different rings
interagindo
with which
e
we interact
inevitavelmente também
and
influenciando.
unavoidably
Então, muito obrigado aos
influence.
presentes aqui em Miami,
So thank you
pessoalmente.
very much to
Obrigado
those
por terem
present
vindo.
in person here in
Aos que estão
Miami.
acompanhando pelo YouTube também, muito obrigado por nos
Thank you for
acompanhar.
coming, and
Sempre
also
estão
thanking for thank you
tentando,
those who
conseguindo
are on
despertar a
YouTube
compreensão da nossa
following
consciência
us.
no momento
So let
mundial
us
da
continue
humanidade tão
trying to
complexo,
awaken
tão
the conscious
mentiroso, digamos assim,
of our
onde nada como
consciousness.
resgatar a nossa
Nothing
genuinidade,
like
a nossa
rescuing our
autenticidade para podermos
authenticity
encontrar
for us to
o verdadeiro
find
motivo
the
de
true
estar aqui.
reason for us to be here.
Boa noite, então, para quem está aqui
Good
em Miami. No
night
Brasil
for
está
those
mais
who are in
tarde, boa noite
Miami. In
também.
Brazil, it's
E
later.
seguimos adiante.
And let's move on. Thank you.